Two things that we talk about a lot in decentralization are autonomy and accountability. And some people seem to be particularly preoccupied with one or the other, but in fact they are inherently both part of the process of decentralization, and they're inextricably linked. And the reason is that autonomy doesn't really work unless local governments are accountable, and local governments can't be accountable unless they have some autonomy to make decisions. So let's unpack that a little bit. Let's say that you have a local government and you have elections in a newly decentralizing system. So citizens elect the local government councilors, and technically these councilors are responsible for providing services that their constituents want and performing other functions that their constituents want, including developing a vision for the local government and pursuing economic development policies under their general mandate and so forth. So the council makes decisions about doing a certain package of functions and activities together. Then the central government steps in and tells them that they can't do that and they have to do something else, i.e. infringes on their autonomy. What happens over time is that citizens realize that the local governments that are supposedly accountable to them simply don't have the autonomy to act in a way that makes that accountability meaningful. And so we have to be very careful about this. And similarly, let's say in another decentralization, there is considerable autonomy and local governments can do what they want, but you don't have a good election system, or you don't have competitive elections, or you don't have meaningful elections and other accountability mechanisms that connect local governments to their citizens. Well, then the local government councils, they may be autonomous. They may end up behaving like fiefdoms because they've been given autonomy from the central government and they can do what they want, and they're not really accountable to the local citizens because the accountability channels, the accountability mechanisms aren't strong enough, and they become almost like independent fiefdoms. And so it's really critical that we have a measure of both autonomy and accountability, that there be provisions for these things, and that there's a recognition of how they have to work together in order to achieve the potential benefits of decentralization. Now again, these balances can change over time. There isn't any absolute standard that you have to have a huge level of autonomy over a huge number of things. In fact, sometimes in weak governance environments where citizens don't actually have any reason to care about or trust the local governments that are being set up, it might be better to start with a smaller set of activities, or even no formal functions being assigned to the local governments, but to give them autonomy over some resources so that they can prove to their citizens that they're responding to them. So in other words, in weak environments, it may be that that certain services remain being provided at a deconcentrated level, but you give a small pot of general unrestricted resources to the elected local governments to begin building this political connectivity and building their capacity to be able to deliver more services later. And then one can think, well, okay, they've demonstrated this basic capacity, the basic systems are in place, the citizens seem to be engaging with them, they're able to perform certain basic functions. So now let's go back and think about what are some of the other things that they might do, and over time they should be able to learn to better act to try to meet their general mandate for the general well-being of their citizens. So on the other hand, in a more advanced environment where there is capacity, you don't want to give too little autonomy because the expectations of citizens on their local governments will be greater, and local governments will need the autonomy to be able to respond to those expectations. So again, the general rule is that we have to be aware of the context, and that there are potentially different starting points, but that as decentralization policies are being developed and as development partners are thinking about how to support decentralization, this critical relationship between autonomy and accountability needs to be recognized, and an appropriate way of using it in a specific context needs to be developed.